Hi there, my name is Anne Logan, and I'm going to be defending Ridgerunner by Gil Adamson, published by House of Anansi Press. Ridgerunner is a sequel to the book The Outlander, but you don't have to have read that book to understand and enjoy Ridgerunner. I personally haven't read it, and it didn't take away from my reading of Ridgerunner at all. The book takes place in Alberta during the First World War. Ridgerunner in the title is referring to William Morland, a father who has lived as a hermit for most of his life. Before the book begins, his wife dies and he temporarily leaves the care of his teenage son, Jack, to an elderly woman and retired nun, Sister Beatrice, who lives in the town of Banff. Desperate to carve out a better life for his son, Morland travels by foot down to southern Alberta and into Montana to steal money, building up a purse big enough to set Jack up for life. So for the majority of the novel, we dip in and out of Morland's adventures, traveling rough and evading the authorities. Jack hates living with the nun, who is very strict. She's attempting to erase Jack's earlier life and claim him as her own son. Although she promised Morland she would simply take care of Jack, she tells herself that Jack is now hers and avoids thinking of what's going to happen when Morland returns. Eventually, Jack just gets fed up with her and runs back to his family cabin hidden deep in the Rocky Mountains, where he's surprisingly self-sufficient, but also receives help from a neighbor, Samson, who is an Indigenous man that also lives deep in the backcountry. So the story rotates between these 4 points of view: Morland, his son Jack, Sister Beatrice, and Samson. The characterization in this book is incredibly in-depth, and by the end, I cared deeply about each and every person that I met. Every character is a loner. They struggle to fit in with regular society. So in that sense, this novel is actually a celebration of solitude and the pleasures and luxury of living by oneself. Each of the adults are running from or avoiding something from their past. Each one of them are also protective of Jack, and they don't want him to make the same mistakes they did. They're trying to do the best they can, even when their mistakes are obvious to us readers. We can sympathize with them as well. Morland, in particular, is full of contradictions. He has a moral compass that points in a different direction than most, but he's also this sort of Robin Hood figure. So I really enjoyed reading about him in particular. As someone personally who likes being alone with books, this book really spoke to me because Jack is really comforted by his books and he doesn't need friends outside of his caretaker in his inner circle. The fact that these characters lived such simple lives with so little to keep them entertained is a nice reminder for us during this pandemic as we're forced into isolation ourselves. Adamson's writing is meant to be savored, and although this book is long at 440 pages, it really is worth your time and commitment. There's numerous lush descriptions of landscape. The mountains themselves are another character. And for those who have been in the Rocky Mountains before, you'll know why. They're just too huge to ignore, and they impact everything when you live out there. This book is a love song to nature, all 4 seasons of it. I personally read the book for the first time when it came out in the spring. And because I live here in Calgary and I have access to all the areas that the book describes, it really made me excited to get out and go hiking. Adamson's descriptions of the town of Banff back at that time are dead on. She clearly did lots of research to help write this book. It's been 10 years since she wrote The Outlander, and it really shows. Everything is so carefully described and detailed. Obviously, this book and her writing in general continues to strike a chord. The Outlander won numerous awards when it was first released, and now Ridgerunner is no different, as it was also shortlisted for the Rogers Writers Trust Prize for Fiction. Waiting 10 years for her novels is clearly worth it. Despite being a quote-unquote literary work, this book is surprisingly plot-driven. The plot twists are incorporated quietly, and if you're not paying close attention to reading, you may miss them, especially when people are remembering things from their past. The plot twists don't necessarily affect the way the characters react, but it affects the way us, the readers, view these characters. The pacing is quick, and despite the long passages of landscape description, there's a ton of action and excitement, because living in the wild is never boring. This is really why the book is called a Western, because there's this sense of lawlessness among the characters, just getting through the day, whatever that may call for. There's some really interesting historical facts embedded in this engaging story as well. Although these facts are widely available, many people aren't aware of Canada's dark history, that the highway between Banff and Lake Louise was actually built by prisoners of war here in Canada during World War I. Canada rounded up immigrants that came here and put them into internment camps, where they were treated quite brutally and made to do backbreaking work. The characters in this book come across a few escapees at one point, so although it's a peripheral storyline to the main plot, it's informative and helps move the action along. We also learn the original name of Lake Louise. It was actually first known as Logan, and Adamson tells us the story behind the changing name. And through the character of Samson, an Indigenous man, we learn that the Stoney Nakoda Indigenous peoples were forced out of Banff National Park. Back then it was known as the Rocky Mountain Park, when it became a tourist destination, because that area was such a money-making destination even back then. So just around the outskirts of this beautiful town were internment camps and people forced out of their ancestral land. It's one of the most beautiful parts of Canada, yet it was built on forced labor and displacement. This really is a book that everyone should read right now. It's simultaneously inward and outward looking, and it teaches us to really look inside ourselves and be honest with our own true characters and who we truly are. This is the lesson I really took away from this book. Each character has their own reckoning, and in most cases, this reckoning is inspired by an internal epiphany. And although this is an often used realization by novelists, it's impactful and it affects you as a reader. Jack, Moreland, and Samson's yearning to live outside of the city are timely reminders that we all need, that simply enjoying the fruits of nature is entertainment enough. In that sense, this book is almost pastoral, but with a much more exciting plotline. Because each character is living a somewhat basic life, it's a timely reminder of all we have to be grateful for. Every character, whether good or bad in this book, shows an amazing amount of endurance and resilience. So if you're starting to feel a little sorry for yourself and everything that we're experiencing right now, I recommend reading a work of realistic historical fiction like this, and you'll realize all we have to be grateful for even in 2020. Thank you.